Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that Memorial Day was originally called Decoration Day because people decorated soldiers' graves with flowers, wreaths, and flags to honor the men and women who died while serving in the United States Armed Forces? Learn how the American flag is traditionally flown at half-staff until noon on Memorial Day, and how the red poppy became a symbol because of a poem. Learn that many communities celebrate Memorial Day with parades, ceremonies, and moments of silence to honor and remember those who sacrificed their lives to protect America's freedoms. Imagine standing over a freshly dug grave in the dead of night. You are a battery commander. Your men have just buried a fellow soldier, and, military tradition dictates that you fire 3 rifle shots over the grave to honor the fallen.
Right, the standard protocol.
Exactly. But there is a terrifying problem. You are so close to enemy lines that the sudden crack of gunfire in the dark might trigger a massive counterattack.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that changes things.
Firing those 3 shots could easily kill everyone standing at the burial site. So you have this tactical dilemma. How do you honor the dead without weakening the enemy?
It's a literal life or death situation.
It really is. And that terrifying high-stakes moment on the battlefield is actually the origin of one of our most solemn national traditions. So today on the Deep Dive, we are bypassing the modern concept of long weekends and, mattress sales and sunscreen completely.
Leaving all of that behind.
Yep. We're looking at a huge stack of sources, historical excerpts, timelines, primary counts. And our mission today is to unearth the visceral historical roots of how a traumatized nation literally had to teach itself how to collectively grieve.
Which is, it is an incredibly heavy undertaking. Because to really understand Memorial Day, we have to strip away the domestication of the holiday.
Right. Take away the barbecues.
Exactly. We have to look past the 3-day weekend and just confront the sheer, unprecedented scale of human loss that forced this tradition into existence in the first place.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because everything starts with the American Civil War. And to truly grasp the foundation of this day, we have to look at a number that dictated everything that followed. 620,000.
Yeah.
That is the total number of soldiers who died across both sides of the conflict. 620,000 casualties.
And it is a magnitude of death that the country simply lacked the physical and, frankly, the emotional infrastructure to handle.
I can't even fathom it.
We're talking about a nation that was suddenly just blanketed in grief. This wasn't a localized tragedy happening in one city or one state.
Right.
It was this fractured society where virtually every community, every single neighborhood was plunged into a state of mourning simultaneously.
Yeah, I was trying to wrap my head around that 620,000 figure earlier, because to a modern ear, it might just sound like, a sterile statistic in a history book.
Sure, just a number.
But think about it this way. For you listening right now, imagine a sudden demographic collapse of a major modern city. Imagine if every single person in a city the size of, say, Baltimore or Boston just vanished from the earth,
right,
wiped out. How does a society even begin to process that level of collective grief? Like, where do you even start when the trauma is that widespread?
What's fascinating here is that the start wasn't some grand government decree. It wasn't, a top-down mandate from a president or a general sitting in Washington saying, hey, this is how the United States will mourn.
It wasn't organized like that at all.
Not at all. It was entirely organic. It was a grassroots response born out of pure, desperate necessity.
Wow.
Before there were national ceremonies, there were simply people looking at fields of hastily dug graves and doing the only thing that felt humanly appropriate.
Just reacting to what was right in front of them.
Exactly. Specifically, Southern women began the physical act of scattering spring flowers on the graves of soldiers. And notably, they didn't discriminate. They decorated the graves of both Union and Confederate soldiers.
They were just confronting the reality in front of them. It was a localized, tangible way to process a trauma that was otherwise just too massive to comprehend.
And that profound grassroots compassion brings us to one of the most remarkable early displays of respect in American history. It actually takes us to May 1st, 1865.
Okay, so the war is essentially just ending.
Right, the wounds are entirely fresh. And on this day, over 1,000 recently freed slaves gather with a very specific, solemn purpose to consecrate a proper burial site for the Union dead.
Man, that is a staggering moment of transition. You have individuals who have just been emancipated from the unimaginable horrors of slavery, and their immediate response is to take it upon themselves to honor the soldiers who fought in the conflict that ultimately secured their freedom.
It really is the ultimate act of dignity. And they were not alone out there either. Regiments of U.S. colored troops were present at this gathering, specifically including the Massachusetts 54th Infantry.
Oh, wow. Which adds an incredible layer of historical weight to the whole thing. For those familiar with the history, the 54th Massachusetts wasn't just any regiment.
No, I don't.
It was one of the first official African-American units in the United States during the Civil War. So these were men who took up arms to fight for their own liberation, standing over the graves of those who fell alongside them. The symbolism of their presence there is just overwhelming.
It's incredibly powerful. And so they sang hymns, they read from the Bible, and mirroring those earlier organic acts of the Southern women, they distributed flowers throughout the entire cemetery. It established the core physical language of remembrance. It wasn't about parades. It was about the physical presence at a gravesite, the singing of a hymn, the placing of a flower.
But a grief this widespread eventually requires a shared national language, right? Like someone has to formalize it.
Exactly. Because John A. Logan didn't just want a one-off event. He wanted a permanent psychological infrastructure for the survivors.
Right, and that brings us to how we take these local, beautiful acts of mourning and turn them into official decrees. The pivotal moment arrives a few years later, specifically on May 5th, 1868. This is when Union Commander Major General John A. Logan steps into the narrative.
Yes, and issues what is known as General Order Number 11.
General Order Number 11.
Which is essentially the blueprint.
Yeah.
It officially set aside May 30, 1868 for a very deliberate purpose. The language of the order explicitly stated the date was, and I'm quoting here, for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves.
So he wasn't inventing anything new.
Exactly. Logan wasn't inventing the concept. He was validating the grassroots traditions that were already happening and just giving them a formal space on the calendar.
He also included this incredibly poignant hope in the order. He hoped that the observance would be kept up from year to year while a survivor of the war remains to honor the memory of his departed comrades.
While a survivor remains. That phrase is just so telling.
It really is.
It shows an understanding that the trauma of the Civil War was going to echo for the rest of these soldiers' lives. Logan was essentially providing a mechanism for them to cope with survivors' guilt.
Yeah.
He was giving them a designated time and place to carry the immense loss they survived year after year.
But here's where I want to push back a bit on the mechanics of this, because the sources say General Order Number 11 explicitly stated that in this observance, no form of ceremony is prescribed.
Right.
That was the rule. No rules. Wait, if there were no rules, how did we get from no prescribed ceremony to the highly formalized military events we see today?
It is a brilliant question. When Logan said, no form of ceremony is prescribed, he was trusting the organic nature of the grief. He was leaving a blank canvas.
Okay.
But human beings are inherently social creatures, right? And an unstructured event simply doesn't hold the weight of the moment when you scale it up. We see the ultimate test of that at the very first gathering at Arlington National Cemetery on that newly decreed date, May 30th, 1868.
And the logistics of that first observance are staggering. You have a crowd of 5,000 participants gathering at Arlington, and they're there to decorate the graves of 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers.
Exactly. When you have 5,000 people looking at 20,000 graves, massive gatherings naturally fill the ceremonial void.
They have to.
Grand, shared experiences inevitably evolve to unify a crowd of that magnitude. And the person tasked with speaking to that massive crowd was General James Garfield.
Garfield's personal arc adds a deeply dark, complex layer to the story of this holiday. Because at the time of this massive speech in 1868, he is a former major general in the Union Army. He had also served as a member of the Ohio State Senate from 1859 to 1861.
Right, a real dual threat.
So he is a soldier and a politician. He survives the deadliest conflict in American history and stands at Arlington, basically the voice of the survivors, honoring the 20,000 who didn't make it.
He is the living embodiment of Logan's hope, a survivor honoring his departed comrades.
But his story doesn't end at Arlington. Over a decade later, on March 4th, 1881, James Garfield is elected the 20th President of the United States. He reaches the absolute pinnacle of American leadership.
Yeah.
And then, less than 4 months into his term, on July 1st, 1881, he is shot by an assassin at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C.
And he didn't die immediately either. He lingered for 79 days before finally passing away in Elbron, New Jersey on September 19th, 1881, serving less than 4 months total.
What strikes me here is the profound irony. Here is a man who navigated the battlefields of the Civil War unscathed, who stood as a voice of remembrance for the dead at Arlington, only to be struck down in a train station in peacetime.
It is a chilling reflection of the era. Garfield's assassination illustrates how violence and trauma had completely seeped into the American DNA.
Yeah, there's no escaping it.
Even in peacetime, at the absolute height of power, the shadow of violence was inescapable. The nation was desperately trying to heal and create days of remembrance, but the peace itself was incredibly fragile. The trauma of the war wasn't just in the past, it was an active, bleeding part of the present.
So out of that fragility, out of that need to unify massive crowds of grieving citizens, customs naturally began to evolve and solidify, which perfectly sets up the practical and poetic origins of those modern customs.
Absolutely.
We see these symbols everywhere on Memorial Day now, but they were born from very specific, often startling moments in history. Take the flag, for instance.
The flag protocol on Memorial Day is highly specific. It is customary to fly the flag at half-staff until noon and then raise it completely until sunset.
It is a deliberate physical motion of the nation's mood. Lowered in mourning for the first half of the day, acknowledging the massive weight of the loss, and then raised in honor and perseverance for the second half. It is a visual representation of moving forward while remembering the past.
That's very striking.
But then we get to the music, the playing of taps. It is now played at all military funerals and memorial services. It is this haunting 24-note bugle call. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the origin of this deeply solemn music, the music that brings tears to people's eyes today, isn't what you would expect at all.
It had absolutely nothing to do with funerals or mourning when it was created.
It actually originated in 1862. Union General Dan Butterfield simply grew tired of the standard lights out call that was sounded at the end of each day in the camps. The melody was apparently just grating on him.
Yeah, he just didn't like it.
You have this Union general in the middle of a brutal, bloody war, essentially acting like a cranky amateur music critic. He and his brigade bugler literally just tinkered with the tune to make it more aesthetically pleasing to the ear.
It was a purely practical change, just a smoother, better way to signal to the camp that the day was over and it was time to sleep.
Right.
But the transition from a mundane lights-out call to a sacred funeral dirge goes back to that terrifying tactical dilemma we discussed at the very beginning.
Yes, the crucial why. Why did they start using a sleep tune at burials? Because of that specific instance where a battery was burying a soldier dangerously close to enemy lines, the battery commander was terrified that firing the customary 3 rifle shots would spark renewed fighting and get them all killed.
Because they were just too close.
They were simply too close to the enemy to make that kind of noise. So instead of the guns, the commander ordered the bugler to quietly play this new melodic, lights-out tune.
It is a profound historical pivot.
I was thinking about this, and it's like, imagine you are working in an incredibly dangerous high-stakes environment today, say a volatile chemical plant.
Okay.
The standard protocol to signal the end of a shift is to ring a massive, deafening alarm bell. But if you ring that bell today, you know the vibration will literally ignite the air and cause a catastrophic explosion.
Right, you'd blow the place up.
So, on the fly, sweating in the dark, you have to invent a completely new, quiet, brilliant workaround just to survive the moment. That is what taps was. It wasn't composed as art. It was a life-saving workaround.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it says something beautiful about how humans create meaning. We take these practical adaptations, a desperate workaround to avoid waking the enemy. And because of the intense emotional context of the burial, we attach profound, permanent significance to it.
Yeah.
Those 24 notes absorbed the sorrow of the battlefield. The lights out for the day became a powerful metaphor for the final lights out of a soldier's life. Humanity weaves a permanent tapestry of respect out of tactical life and death necessity.
Man, that's powerful. And it isn't just tactical necessity that we turn into symbols either. We also do it with art. Which brings us to the red poppies, another ubiquitous symbol of the holiday.
Yeah, and this tradition moves us out of the Civil War era and into the 20th century, specifically the First World War.
The custom of wearing red poppies is directly inspired by the famous World War I poem, In Flanders Fields, written by John McCrae. But the poem itself, as powerful as it was, didn't start the physical tradition of wearing the flower on a lapel. A poem needs a champion to become a physical movement.
It required someone to actively bridge the gap between a piece of literature and a national action.
That person was Moyna Michael. She was a Georgia teacher and a volunteer war worker. In 1915, she read the poem and was so moved by the imagery that she began a dedicated campaign. Her goal was to make the red poppy a physical tribute to veterans, specifically for keeping the faith with all who died.
She saw the flower in the poem not just as beautiful imagery, but as an instruction. And her campaign was incredibly successful. She didn't just create a symbolic gesture, she created a practical mechanism for support.
Right.
The sale of artificial poppies went on to help fund the work of the veterans of foreign wars.
It is amazing how a single poem, read by a teacher in Georgia, cascades into a national symbol that actively funds veteran support for a century. Moyna Michael gave people a small, physical act, pinning a poppy to their lapel that connected them to a massive historical weight, much like those Southern women scattering flowers decades earlier.
Exactly. The physical act of participation is what keeps the memory alive.
And as we trace this history, it is fascinating to note how the name of the day itself evolved alongside these expanding customs. For decades, the holiday was universally known as Decoration Day, which makes perfect sense given the focus of Logan's General Order Number 11 on strewing flowers and decorating graves.
The name was entirely literal. It described the specific action being performed at the cemetery.
But as time went on and the focus broadened to encompass the fallen of World War I, World War II, and subsequent global conflicts, the terminology slowly shifted in the public consciousness. Yet, it wasn't actually declared to be the official name Memorial Day by federal law until 1967.
1967. That is surprisingly recent when you consider the holiday has its roots in 1865.
It really is.
It took a full century for the name Memorial Day to be formally codified in federal law.
It highlights how this is a living, breathing tradition that adapts over generations, but the core purpose remains entirely untouched. Memorial Day is, above all else, a time to remember those who have died to defend freedoms. It is positioned as a critical, deliberate time to say thank you to someone who sacrificed to serve the country.
It is a moment of deliberate gratitude, acknowledging that the empty space on the calendar was paid for by someone else.
There is a poem by Charles M. Province, a soldier in the U.S. Army, that is referenced as part of this ongoing legacy. It is a continuous dialogue between the past and the present, soldiers reflecting on the weight of the sacrifice made by those who wore the uniform before them. And for you listening, this brings the historical narrative directly into your present day.
Because the history of this day isn't just about the grand military cemeteries or figures like General Garfield or even the massive casualties, it is also highly personal.
We see a very significant shift that has occurred over time. While Memorial Day remains a dedicated time to go to a cemetery and put flowers on the graves of soldiers, today, many people also use the day to visit and decorate the graves of their own non-military family members. It has naturally expanded into a broader day of ancestral remembrance.
The focus has widened from exclusively military Greece to encompassing personal, familial lineage.
And there are incredibly accessible tools to dive into that lineage now. You can explore your own family history on platforms like FamilySearch.org, reading special stories about your deceased ancestors. Some of those stories might simply make you smile, but the history of others might cause you to deeply consider the significant sacrifices of those who came before you, whether they wore a military uniform or not.
It ensures that the thread connecting the past to your specific present remains unbroken.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to ponder today. When General Order Number 11 was enacted in 1868, it had a very specific, narrow mandate to honor the departed comrades of war, the military fallen. Yet today, the observance has naturally expanded to include decorating the graves of civilian family members, parents, and grandparents right alongside the soldiers. So ask yourself this. How does this modern expansion of the holiday reflect a deeper, universal human instinct? Have we taken a day originally designed by a general for military remembrance and naturally evolved it into a broader, essential reflex to keep the faith with absolutely everyone we've lost? Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.